because now it's time to take the topic even further with the upcoming panel discussion on higher education and global change, strategies for sustainable international cooperation, study, and mobility. And for this, I would like to welcome back Professor Dr. Angela Itte, HRK Vice President for International Affairs and President of the Technical University of Braunschweig in Germany. Also, a warm welcome to Dora Longoni, Head of Education and Student Affairs Division at the University of Milano. Welcome. And also a warm welcome to Franziska Schenk. She is co-director of the Office of International Affairs at the University of Hohenheim in Germany. And again, Peter Maaßen, it's great to have you with us again. And I would start with a prompt that Peter Maaßen gave us when he said, well, one important point is, I mean, you give us many important points, but one I would like to take out, you said you have to clarify what's the meaning of internationalization for you as an institution. What are the rationales behind that? I would like to start with that by asking all of the panel about, well, what does international cooperation and sustainable cooperation really mean to you? And maybe you can give me a concrete example on that. So basically, what's your rationale when it comes to sustainable international cooperation at your university? And I would like to start with Dora Longoni. You have been at your university as the head of Education and Student Affairs Division just for a few months now, but before that you have been at various Italian universities, so you have a fairly good overview what's going on in Italy and Europe in regard to strategic internationalization of universities. So could you describe the rationale of internationalization at Italian universities, at the University of Milano? What's in the way the whole idea, the meaning behind it?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me first. Thank you for having the opportunity of listening to Professor Maaßen. It's been a very interesting keynote speech. So this is a very key issue, actually. Rationales, I'm very fond of rationales. When I started working in the field of internationalization, I remember reading Jane Knight's reflections on what is internationalization and the rationales behind it. These rationales, for sure, have changed in the last years, and I think in any country there are certain, let's say, aspirations. Internationalization is mostly seen as a way to confirm the status of your university in terms of being a prestigious, research-intensive university. So it starts from positioning your institution in the international arena to then more defining which is your actual goal in internationalizing, because internationalization actually it's not an end in itself, it's a tool. So you have to really clarify what is it in it for you. So I've been in 3 different universities: at the Politecnico di Milano, which was a technical university quite well known. They had a very strong strategy for attracting international students. Then I went to Padua, where we worked very much on the concept of responsible internationalization. Padua is a very old, prestigious, comprehensive university, very much focused on inclusiveness. And that was not just a buzzword, it was a true word, a true meaning. So internationalization should be connected with your strategy and as a university. And in this new experience, is the University of Milan Bicocca is a young university that will be more visible also in the international arena. It's a university that was founded 25 years ago. I think every institution should adapt the internationalization to its core mission. So it has to be very well connected with what you want to reach. And sustainability for me in internationalization has always meant choosing the right partners that will bring you to your goals. Meaning that if you have a plan, you know which are the partners that are fundamental to reach your plan. also in the on an international, let's say, framework. It cannot be just signing agreements or focusing on recruitment, because you need to have international students for rankings and so on and so forth. It has to be a very, let's say, you have to be aware of what is what is there in common with your partners that will make you profit from efforts of internationalization. That is also something that can open up the discussion on what to do with the global south. This
Can
is a little bit more difficult, so I
Yeah,
stop.
could you, from what you just told us, could you give us an concrete example of such a partnership you just described? A mutual partnership that is sustainable, that works the way you described, according to the goals of your university?
Well, I remember a partnership in my previous institution that was very at the University of Padua with the a very prestigious Australian university, and it was based on common on the reciprocal recognition of what we would have needed to progress in our strategies, both in research and in education. So if you recognize yourself on the same path and you can both mutually benefit from it, it's fundamental. You have to set your goals together, in my view, in bilateral partnerships as well as in multilateral partnerships.
Thank you so much for now. Franziska Schenk from the University of Hohenheim. The international offices at the universities in the state of Baden-Württemberg cooperate especially well in assessing the risks of international cooperation. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But first, what is at your university, what is the agreement on what internationalization is good for? What does it stand for?
Well, thanks first of all for having me. You might know that the University of Hohenheim has a very clear profile that is essentially sustainability, so sustainable agri-food systems, for example, or maintaining the biodiversity. And for all this, the University of Hohenheim has always been very internationally oriented, and we maintain strong partnerships. So I think that's the consensus at the university, to have these international contacts. What we do now is to look at exactly the sustainable international cooperation. What does it mean for us at our university? So make our contribution to the SDGs more visible. For example, our contribution in teaching and learning, teaching and research, for example. But of course, we also discuss supporting green travel and all these things. But coming to your aspect, what from my perspective as an international relations officer, sustainability is also efficiency and resilience, and using our resources wisely. So that's the reason why, as also Dora Longoni said, that we focus on networks when we cooperate internationally. We focus on networks to offer high quality study abroad stays, for example. But we also focus on networks, as you just said, when cooperating with our colleagues within the state of Baden-Württemberg, to exchange experiences and to exchange our knowledge. And so one thing, as you asked for, also for a concrete example, one thing that we developed together is a matrix to analyze international cooperation really in our daily work. So we have the four dimensions of values, benefits, responsibilities, and risks, and it's actually it's a one-pager that can help you to analyze, for example, a delegation or a new project together with a professor, for example, and really think of all the different aspects. So this is something that I would like to add here to this discussion, that sustainability in this regard is also working in networks within the university, within the universities in the state, but also, for example, within Europe.
And the metrics you just talked about, is it being used by all the universities or some universities in Baden-Württemberg? And is it applied by each and every individual researcher, or how exactly do you use that metrics?
So we developed it together at the level of the international offices, and then we started to present and discuss it within our universities, in the committees, for example, in the rectorate or in the senate. We, for example, we have actually a website for our own researchers, where they can find more information on how to enter into an international cooperation. You have, all the things that you would expect there, the draft of an MOU and so on, but also this metrics where they can have a look at and discuss it. But the other universities might have different approaches. But it is used in the international offices in every case, and sometimes it got a bit more spread into the universities for the researchers, for the research support departments, and so on.
Thank you so much. Angela Ittel, before coming to Braunschweig, you have been at the Technical University in Berlin, also focusing on international relationships. And so I was wondering, if you compare the rationales between the university, Technical University in Berlin and now in Braunschweig, are there differences there? So is there a different rationale, or is it basically, do all research-focused universities in Germany, or the ones you know, have a comparable, similar rationale?
Yeah. Thanks. I just waved to Dora because when I was in Berlin, we used to work together, and I'm really happy to see you. And I think that's a sign of sustainable international cooperation, right? We've known each other for decades almost. It's great to see you. I think in terms of research, the rationales are very similar between the universities. Both universities realize that, of course, interdisciplinarity, as Peter said, but also just the broad global challenges are not solvable without international collaborations. I think there might be some differences between in the rationale of having attracting international students, because in Berlin, Berlin is such a large city, and it's so common for international students to come, but then also go and come again, or maybe not. And in Braunschweig, there's more focus on, or a greater interest in attracting international students, but then also integrate them into the German system. And so there were some discussions on, is it worth it to attract international students if they then leave us again? How much do we invest in people who are going to end up leaving again and not knowing, and we don't know whether they are coming back? And of course, this spirit is sort of right now very prominent in the Fachkräftemangel, in the need to attract students for for the industry later on. So now there's a greater effort, I think, to really attract students and then also socialize them into the German society.
What also shows that we can easily redefine words like sustainability. So maybe now people will argue, well, only cooperation that brings international students to Germany who like to stay there is a sustainable cooperation, something nobody would have said maybe 20 years ago. So give us, please, your definition.
Sorry. I think what I don't think what I've tried to do here is to really define or to define criteria for when to sign an MOU, because I do not want, I never have, to just sign an MOU and then nothing ever happened that leaks in the drawer. We all have that, of course, obviously, and sometimes international cooperation are really just tied to one person or two people who connect in this university. We have a sort of a holistic type model of development, and for me it's really important that, especially for our strategic partnerships, we have cooperation in teaching, in research, but also in transfer, and something really important to me in governance and administration. So I introduced I'm not signing an MOU anymore if the other university does not allow for administrative staff to exchange, because I think that's a key, that's a base for sustainable internationalization. If this group doesn't know each other, then it really depends on, these two scientists or these two teachers who connect, and it won't be sustainable. So that's sort of one example of how I define, or how we define in Braunschweig, sustainable international partnerships.
Thank you so much. Peter Maaßen, you talked about this shift from what you called open internationalization to responsible internationalization. Just a side remark, again, this term responsible internationalization is something that is really open up to definition. But when we talk about the shift, when would you say did it happen, this shift between open and responsible internationalization?
Yes, thank you. I would say we're in the middle of it. It didn't happen at a certain moment, and then from then on we had to develop or promote responsible internationalization. But it's related to the process that's been going on for a long time in our societies, where our basic activities, the education of the labor force, as well as producing research, producing knowledge, has become more and more important. Not just for economic competitiveness and growth, but also for other reasons, which are now kind of combined under the term geopolitical, meaning that the interest related to all these policies create certain expectations about how higher education institutions behave and contribute to the realization of these policies and agendas. And in that, the higher education institutions are expected to behave in a responsible way. But what is responsible and what's not responsible, in my view, should be defined by the institutions and not by the politicians. I think that's part of the transition that, and I referred to it by getting the definition power, taking the definition power back. That's part of the transition that's important, and that's not just important, but also necessary, from open internationalization, where anything goes, to internationalization, which relates to more directly to various policy agendas in our societies, but not in a way that's prescribed by external stakeholders. That's the essence in it, I think, when it comes to moving forward with internationalization.
The fact that you are stressing that, not defined by external stakeholders, just like politicians, for example, shows the fact that this is actually something that many universities fear, that exactly this is happening. You talked about an age of crisis. I think we are in an age of global crisis right now. And this could also be an age of knowledge then, but I'm not sure about that yet, if this age of crisis goes along with an age of knowledge. And also, I'm not sure if it goes along with an age of international cooperation. You talked about migration as a huge issue now in politics. You talked about demographics and security as big issues. And I'm not sure that all those topics are really strengthening the expectations of society towards universities, that they bring in more international people, that they getting more and more international. Obviously, there's a trend against that. And Dora, I saw that you wanted to say something, so please go ahead.
No, but thank you so much, because last year when I was at the University of Padua in November, we organized a conference. The title was "Competing Trends in International Education: Fostering Responsible Approaches." So very much in line with what we are discussing here, because how can you be responsible when you need to attract students from Africa? Because you're in the next 10 years, universities in Italy will have a huge demographic degrowth. It's calculated by 2040 on average nationwide, less than 11%. We will have a degrowth of 11% of students entering universities. Okay, it's quite huge as a number. It will be different. The South will almost, there will be universities in the South that might close down because they will have even less than, I mean, they will lose 25% of students if the trends continue. But the trend cannot, I mean, those who were not, the Italians that were not born 2 years ago will not have 18 years in 2040, okay? So this is already very clear. So if we need to attract students from the only continent, together with India, with India, but China will also be a little bit in a decrease. But Africa for sure will be the continent with more and more young people. So how to be responsible when we will be in need of attracting those students, because we need the workforce, as was said by Dr. Itel also, for our industry. So which kind of agreements are we going to make? I mean, I'm leaving this open because this is exactly the point at which we are now. We will need more international students, but we cannot afford to of course, this implies an awful brain drain from those countries, and this cannot be tolerated any longer. Otherwise, we cannot talk about responsible internationalization. But we are for sure in a very delicate moment.
And it shows one more contradiction because, as Peter Maaßen said before, actually we have to move towards more equal partnerships between North and South. And actually, obviously, the national rationales right now, also the political rationales, go pretty much against that. Franziska Schenk, you agree?
Yes, there's been a change. The University of Hohenheim introduced international master programs that were completely taught in English in the field of agriculture 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. And then the rationale was to send the graduates back to their home countries to help them build up the economies there and the agricultural systems. But now, a couple of years ago, you all know the rationale is different, and we are asked to recruit students for the German labor market. So, but we also have, so we have to deal with this. And the thing is that we know is that many students think about staying in Germany after their studies. So what we do now is to help them actually be able to stay because they come here without a word in German of German language knowledge. And so what we try to do now with the help of the DAD and the new program, the new FIT program, is to help them prepare for the German job market if they want to stay. But yes, it's contradictory, and we have to think about our study programs, what we actually want to do with them, because when they were introduced, the rationale was completely the opposite, actually.
Thank you so much. We were just talking about students, which is also part of field. It's a field of activity actually when it comes to HK Advance. But maybe we move a step back towards another field of activity: partnerships in challenging times. How can we? And this was the question we were just starting off with. How can we ensure that both sides in a partnership actually benefit mutually? While at the same time, we talked about the challenges that are already there. So obviously the challenges for both partners in a cooperation can be different ones. Both have strong interests. We as Europeans, we as Germans have strong interests, but our partners have as well. So how can we, Angela Ittel, balance that in those times we are just in?
Yeah, I hope you forgive me, but I want to add something to something that Frau Schenk said, because I think this, you mentioned the FIT program, and I wanted to just add this. This is also, if you look at the glass half full, this might also be a chance in terms of responsible internationalization, that we not only have this deficit model in mind, we need to prepare the students, or we need to fix up the students so they fit into our culture. But what we do in Braunschweig a lot is talk to the labor market that is here around us and see how they can adjust to students easier. So it's not a deficit of the students who come and need to be fixed to fit in our society, but also sort of at least increase the awareness that companies and the labor market needs to change as well. So that's something that's really dear to my heart. That's why I wanted to add this, because that cultural change, I think, is very important. And that's also responsible internationalization, that we work on society. Anyway, you asked me about mutual partners and
how you can balance those interests that obviously are often very contradictory.
Yeah, in my experience, that's most easily done if you really have these partnerships grow from bottom up. If there are two presidents or rectors who say, this is an interesting partnership, let's form some strategic partnership, that doesn't work. But what we do here is, of course, I find some partnerships really interesting and others maybe not as relevant right now. We always start from our members. We have workshops together. We sort of see whether there are common interests that really bind them together. That really is sort of the glue to these partnerships, and also on an equal footing. There needs to be a mutual benefit that the members can formulate, that they can really describe. And then I think that's a good instrument, at least, to form mutual and on an equitable level.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for the first question from the audience, which I would like to forward to Peter Maaßen directly, because you talked about the influence of external actors and that we should push that back as universities and talk about what's important, what's rational for the universities. But there's one important question, the money. Internationalization without funding is difficult. How can we overcome the political influences and also the economic efforts of institutions, global markets? So, in a way, who pays decides, somebody could argue when it comes to internationalization.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course, and we see that dynamic currently in Europe, where on the one hand we have the Draghi report, which wants or which promotes huge investments in higher education, science, and innovation, and hundreds of billions extra on top of what is already invested, on the basis of the argument, if we don't, we will fall behind in such a way that Europe slowly dies. And he used these dramatic words. On the other hand, we have national realities, and national realities political. If you look at recent elections in Germany, the new government in the Netherlands, there are other examples where the tendency is to cut back on higher education and science in national public budgets. So this is a key question. And I think part of this is also the way in which higher education, science, and society communicate. So the interaction. I think there's a lot of room for improvement on the universities and colleges side to communicate their performance and the importance of also internationalization. I mean, the arguments that Draghi is using is arguments we've been using in higher education for a long time, but no one or hardly anyone is, at least not in all political parties, is listening. I think collaboration, creating a joint voice for universities and colleges is important. And that's exactly what we've heard, for example, in Brussels, when as part of an effort by a European University Alliance, the Guild, where also Tübingen and Göttingen are member, when we start to discuss with the European Commission how support for new types of collaboration between African and European universities could be developed. And the first thing we heard in the first meetings was, but we never hear anything from the universities, at least not collectively, when it comes to the way forward in international collaboration. So please, can you develop ideas? I think that is what we should do more. to counter the trend that there's currently in a large part of the political systems in our countries, there's a tendency to cut back on higher education instead of, as Draghi is suggesting, increasing the investments.
So you call for more ideas from inside the universities. Universities should be louder in this discussion, right?
Yes, but not only ideas, also performance. I mean, where do the future knowledge workers come from? They don't come out of the air. They are produced by higher education institutions, or produced, but they are, let's say, the graduates from higher education institutions. The way in which in regions in Germany, throughout Europe, the higher education institution collaborate within their region with other partners, private sector, but also public sector, extremely important, but not known enough, certainly not outside the regions. So I think there's room for improvement in the way in which we communicate, including developing ideas.
So Dora, if we apply that to the Italian case, you talked about universities in southern Italy that are well, shrinking by maybe 1/4 or something like that, or
In the
maybe
future,
some
yeah.
in the future. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit similar when we talk about some regions in Germany, some regions in Eastern Germany, for example, that are losing. May lose students in the future. Some of them are already losing. So, if I take Peter's argument, they have to perform even better to counteract that. Is that realistic? I mean, I'm sure that they're already doing what they can.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm sure I don't have an answer, but I can try to figure out the situation a little bit more. First of all, there are examples of even. There are very good examples of universities in the south. They're quite strong internationally. That they have taken advantage. I'm thinking of the University of Calabria, which is one of the poorest region in Europe. But there is a university that has a strong internationalization strategy, very attractive for the from students from the Mediterranean area, which is exactly that where they should attract students from. So it's very much, as Dr. Itta said, bottom up within a university, the bottom up approach within the university, but also the university towards their government should have a bottom-up approach. In Italy, our government is very rarely giving directions to university, which may be in terms of internationalization, which may be an advantage, but also a disadvantage. So sometimes we lack direction, but we're free to propose. And in a way, this is making also universities that are not in ideal conditions more able to follow their own path. And I would like also to mention before you were an example of a partnership that can be sustainable. The University of Milano Bicocca very recently opened an outpost in Uganda. We are sending there our doctors. It's a private, also there is a foundation there that has built a hospital, and we need to train our doctors to be, I mean, much more, how to say, close to their patients. I'm not a medical doctor, but let's say that in Africa, the conditions are so that the student doctors that we send there for internship have such an experience that they cannot have here in Europe. Okay. So, and this is a mutual beneficial kind of partnership, because of course they need our techniques, the knowledge of our doctors, but we also need our doctor to be trained to face illnesses that here are almost disappeared. So they are much more knowledgeable when they're back. And this is a very good example of, as Dr. Itta was saying, we need to find case by case examples of successful interactions between university, not MOUs signed for the sake of signing it, but because underneath we have scientists, we have researchers, we have students that are willing to collaborate. And in this, it might be micro actions, but these micro actions, if they are multiplied and made sustainable by funding, unfortunately we need the funding, but that's true, and we can make proposals and show our government how beneficial it can be for both. So it has to be a win-win situation. And this is the approach for an agreement that I've kept in the last years. So not signing any agreement for the sake of having more. We don't need more. We need very specific agreements with very clear goals.
Angela Ittel, would you add your perspective to that?
Yeah, I mean, I understood your question, that you sort of, what are the factors to prevent to lose even more students, right? I mean,
Yes.
that was sort of your question. And of course, we can't change demographic developments. And of course, we have fewer students. But I reacted and I sort of wanted to say something when you said we have to perform even better, the universities, because I think, I strongly believe that we need to really seriously think about performing differently so we can attract students. Still, it's, I mean, of course the total number will be different, but if we sort of stick to what we've been doing for decades, I don't think we'll have any students no matter how well we perform. I think
And we
we
can
need to
even shift this away from the question of students and just say, well, my first question to you was, so may there be a different paradigm when it comes to internationalization between Braunschweig and Berlin? And you said, well, to a high percentage, it's pretty much the same. International Research University. Maybe it's also a matter of performance to have more individual strategies regarding on the place where you are. I mean, so obviously right now, maybe the answers are too similar. Maybe it's also a matter of performance to come up with answers that fit to the place where you are.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we are trying to do actually right now here in Braunschweig. We have lots of research institutes in the area, and we have lots of industry. And so what I'm trying to do, or what we are trying to do here, is right now attracting international people who are then, but then be very flexible in their career path. They can stay for a while at the university, but then maybe they want to join the industry and come back to the university or to some other research institute. That is fairly common in engineering for people to change, but not in other subjects, not in other disciplines. And that's something I think is very attractive to really not only sort of advertise with your university, but also with the entire context that you are embedded in. To just sort of broaden the perspectives. And it doesn't matter whether they won't be scientists at TU Braunschweig, but they're within the scientific ecosystem around us. And I think that's one of our goals right now that we have a strong focus on.
Franziska Schenk, the answer of your university to the question of performance is obviously be this sustainability strategy, to say we are a university very much focusing on sustainability and the question of sustainable research or research on sustainability and also sustainable cooperation. Is that still enough for a university that is pretty small? You're not a huge big player, you're a small university. So what else do you have to come up with?
Yes, we are very small. And of course, we cannot solve any of these issues by ourselves. So what we actually do is focus on our networks. And we have the European networks of life science universities, for example, where we develop together the core competencies the students will need in the future. That will help us also to have a better recruitment strategy for the global recruitment. We will do it together and not by ourselves, and give the students the possibility to study not only at our very small university, but also at the other universities, and really have the full learning experience by it. So not just any random study abroad stay, but something that has been really developed together with the other universities. And there are so many different aspects where we think that it's beneficial to work together and to put our resources in these networks. Not only can we, as we think, adapt more easily to any changes in the global landscape, but it will also help us to be more visible on the global recruitment market, so to say, for students, but also to develop together a green travel strategy and so on. I really don't understand why we should think about green travel by ourselves if it's the whole essence of the thing to do it with partners. So why not develop it together? And so that's the idea behind it. Also, what Professor Maaßen was mentioning, the Guild and the African Union cooperation. For example, there are different centers now where Hohenheim is also collaborating in one. So this is something that we think we really put our efforts in it, so that we are not driven by outsiders or external factors in what we do, but that we have the chance to develop new approaches for this international cooperation together with partners. As we are small, we know that, and we think we need partners, strong partners and networks to be able to compete in this market. So it's competition through collaboration.
Thank you so much. Peter Maaßen, everybody is talking about networks, everybody is talking about alliances. Probably 30 or 40 years ago, we would have talked about individual cooperations between researchers more often. So that's part of the shift we are talking about. How much do you think the shift is due to the European Union and the university alliances strategy and initiative? How much has that to do with that?
Yes, thank you. The Erasmus program, as we know it, has played an important role in not only the formal collaboration between European higher education institutions and education, but also in creating support structures, internationalization offices. Before Erasmus was established, there were hardly any universities in Europe with internationalization offices. So it had a major impact in that sense. And you could say that was a shift from old bottom-up individual internationalization, also by students, to more formal and more organized internationalization. And that part from the late 1980s to now you can call open traditional internationalization. And we're now in a shift towards more networking, more collaboration, as Franziska Schenk was also pointing to. This is kind of where we realize that for a lot of academic areas, the individual capacity of higher education institutions, of individual higher education institutions, is not enough. Even the top universities cannot make scientific progress on their own. And for educational collaboration, there are many reasons why we stimulate, not just in Europe, but also elsewhere, the student mobility. But we have to think anew and adapt it to new realities in that sense. So just a brief example of that from this African European university collaboration. The participating universities have agreed to support financially or in other ways clusters of research excellence consisting of at least 3 African and 3 European universities from 3 different countries on each continent. And these clusters would have to have a long-term plan, would have to be willing to invest in more equal collaboration, career paths for African scholars, and be in the forefront of science in either in healthcare or in natural science, climate change, or in social sciences. And these clusters have made quite a lot of progress and are also now working on innovating doctoral education, using digital technologies. And they've recently got received from MasterCard Foundation the funding of 7,000 PhD positions, fully funded by MasterCard, where each PhD student would start in Africa, but then would spend at least half a year in Europe. And that kind of collaboration, I think, is also building the foundation for future collaboration, where the aim is to prevent brain drain and have joint master, PhD, postdoctoral programs, where students and staff would move back and forth instead of being established either in Europe or in Africa. And how that affects the labor market is also something that's being discussed, to prevent that you get large groups of students from India and Africa moving to Europe and establishing here. So there are also other ways of organizing parts of the labor market in ways that resembles what we are trying now to do in higher education.
Thank you so much. So we talked about the 3 fields of activity of HIK Advanced Partnerships in challenging times. We talked about study, teaching, mobility, and we also talked about the recruitment. A little bit about the recruitment of international researchers. I think we can talk about that a little bit more. We talked about it in regard to brain drain, no brain drain, but there's an important question from the audience that I would like to forward to you. How to measure actually performance. We can talk about many aspects of internationalization and how we value them by ourselves, but how to measure that? What would your recommendation be with regard to measuring performance in higher education internationalization? If we agree that obviously it is more about performance now, maybe less quantitative, more quality and impact oriented, but how to measure it? And I would like to forward that question to the representatives of our universities here first. Well, Peter, you are at the university as well, but to our non-keynote speakers first. So when it comes to your institution, how do you measure the performance of the internationalization strategy that you apply? Franziska?
Well, that's been a question that's been discussed for many, many years now, and I really don't have a good answer. So of course we have all the data and everything, and it's getting better and better compared to what we had like 10 years ago with now I forgot the name of the portal where you get all the data. I'm sorry, maybe I remember later. But still, we are thinking about novel approaches to measure it in terms of impact, what we actually do in terms of publications, in terms of connection to society, and so on, with all these different approaches. So we have developed, for example, for our network, monitoring, evaluation, and learning strategy, where we set our goals and try to find the indicators that best describe them, and then analyze it and try to learn from it, because this is the whole reason behind it, I think. But I don't have a very good answer to this question.
I think it was a pretty good answer, but it's also showing that obviously we're again in the middle of something of some redefining there, reconfiguring there, what Peter said. So that's part of the answer. Maybe we are not there yet. Dora, what's your answer?
In this, our ministry is very helpful. We have a lot of indicators for that. But I would say if we look at recruitment of international students, the indicators that we would use is how many students with the title obtained abroad do you have, how many of those were enrolled, and those. But this is a very simple indicator. I would say in this field, the most important indicator would be how many international graduates do you have, and if those graduates could graduate in time. So if you mix indicators, then you can have also an idea of the outcome. The impact is more difficult, but the outcome at least. So if your students, because another indicator for us would be that you need students to pass a certain number of exams, do a certain number of credits a year. So if international students are not able to follow that line, it's not worthwhile recruiting them. So quality has to be there. So there is also, let's say, some very practical boundaries in terms of recruitment. You cannot recruit students that do not perform well and do not graduate in time. So this is one set of indicators that are very much concrete and can be studied. And the outcome is that if you have very, very good let's say, internationalization strategy, and you market and you recruit your students in the right areas for your subject areas, then they will be good graduates and will have the opportunity of choosing whether to stay on in Italy for working or go abroad. As usually it's 1/3 stay and the rest either go back. This is what we found out in various surveys, and 1/3 go back and 1/3 go elsewhere. So which just is, I mean, brains should be mobile. Huh? We cannot either tell them to go back or stay. They have to be free to decide when they want to build up their career. So basically, measuring performance is always tricky, because sometimes the numbers are very good. The impact is what has your university become after all these efforts. In some examples, I mean, the university I've been working for more than 20 years, the Technical University in Milan, for Bolimi, who had a very, very strong internationalization strategy, this has meant climbing up the rankings, for sure. It's been the first ranked Italian universities for years. So internationalization you can measure the performance in internationalization, but then of course you have to reason on all the other items. So indicators are there. They are not maybe indicating everything. They're more quantitative than qualitative. But again, if then a student graduates, it's also quality must be there.
Thank you so much. And if we have a shift in our approach towards internationalization, as we talked about, obviously there may also be a shift in how to measure performance in higher education internationalization. Angela, your answer to that question of performance indicators?
Yeah, I mean, all the indicators, the quantitative indicators have been named here and described. And of course, we use them as well, especially the publication, the common publications between international partners. I actually think, I mean, that is a quantitative indicator, but I think that's actually also an impact indicator, because publications don't just appear. They are two people working together, or two people or groups of people. But maybe, especially in terms of, view of the time, I just want to add one thing, that TU Braunschweig decided to join the initiative COARA, which is an EU initiative for qualitative, or for different, not qualitative, but for a different evaluation of research and performance. And that's something, there are no answers yet, but it's a process that are like more than 700 institutions across Europe are involved in. And I think that's and the German Research Foundation is also part of this. So it's not just sort of some hippie sort of kind of initiative. But it's, and we are actively engaged, and maybe next year we have more answers, but I don't want to not answer, but right now it's really a process that is going on between these partners.
And again, also to some degree motivated by the European Union, this process,
exactly.
Which is interesting that the European Union really is a very active player in there, starting with Erasmus, going on with the university alliances, and now talking about COARA, which is not only related to internationalization, but it's related to the impact of research and the quality of research. Looking at
and it's discussed in an international context, which makes it so important. Yeah.
Exactly. Looking at the time, I would like to come to a short round of final statements. We talked about many challenges when it comes to internationalization and coming up with a sustainable internationalization strategy. But if there was one most pressing step that you would have to choose when it comes to further develop your internationalization strategy, or any good sustainable internationalization strategy, what's most important? What's the next important step? Franziska, maybe you would like to start.
I have an answer, but I don't know if it's the one that you want to hear, because it's not something that we can do at the university, but it is something that has to be done by the political level, because we need housing, and we need an immigration system that works better, maybe. and a welcome culture in the foreigners authorities and so on. So, but these are the things that really are on my heart at the moment, because yeah, it would help a lot if we had more of these things.
Dora, a short answer from you?
My answer would be that a very good internationalization strategy has to be co-designed with your partners. So you have, for me, networks existed before the European Union actually encouraged us to formalize those networks. Actually, when I met Dr. Itel, we were in an alliance that was A4Tech Alliance, was designed by 4 rectors. And we put in the budget was ours. It was not coming from anywhere else. And I think it's very important to choose your partners and understand the journey you want to do with very few specific international partners. And then build up, if you want to be an international university, a very strategy that is very specific to what are your aims. So the strategy should be common and co-designed. And you need partners for that. You can't do it alone. So I think Alliance came later. Universities that wanted to be international already knew that they would have needed partners. So I would suggest any university, even small universities, even regional university, to reason in this way. Which partner do we need to go ahead in our plan?
Thank you so much. Angela Itte, the next step, or maybe your next step in Braunschweig when it comes to sustainable internationalization strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we're working really hard on understanding internationalization really as a cost-cutting theme throughout all our achievement dimensions. So, you know, not only there's internationalization, there's the rest of the university, but sort of to think the aspects of internationalization, no matter what you do for this, for the university or within the university. So it's sort of a understanding internationalization as a cost-cutting theme and a mainstreaming of internationalization, which I think brings cultural change that we need.
Thank you. Peter Maaßen, you kicked off our discussion with your keynote and with a lot of food of thought. So wrap it up with a final maybe observation or final idea of what could be the next step for institutions that really want to further and develop their internationalization strategy.
Yes, thank you. And I think a lot has been said already. So I will also emphasize the importance of for the institutional level, so the higher education institution, to have control over internationalization. And that means get rid of memoranda of understanding and identify your strategic partners. That doesn't mean that you have to rely or base your internationalization on one alliance only. But strategic partners are important from an institutional perspective, so that it's also clear for your students and staff who does our institution want to work with. In addition to that, there can be at the faculty and departmental level other kinds of networks. But for an institution, it's very important to develop a profile, given the challenges that we're facing in higher education, all the challenges that I mentioned and many more, where we are supposed to be proactive and use our international partnerships to contribute to the kind of knowledge production, graduates, but also solutions that our societies would like to receive from us. So in that sense, I think focusing on strategic partnerships at the institutional level and maybe even at the national level for rectors conferences like the HRK is extremely important in order to prevent that you spread your focus and interest far too thinly.
Higher education and global change strategies for sustainable international cooperation, study and mobility. Thank you so much, Angela Itte. Thank you so much, Peter Maaßen, Dora Longoni and Franziska Schenk. Thanks for being with us. Und damit wechsle ich auch wieder ins Deutsche zum Abschluss des ersten Tages. Wir haben ja noch 3 weitere Tage vor uns. Ich denke, wir haben schon einen ganz guten Start gehabt, der technisch ein bisschen ruckelig war am Anfang. Wir haben uns gut eingearbeitet dabei und inhaltlich fand ich es sehr spannend. Ich freue mich über weitere Kommentare und Fragen, auch morgen und in den nächsten Tagen, die ich gerne einbringe in unsere Diskussion. Und insofern nochmal die Motivation, die Einladung, seien Sie ruhig aktiv dabei, beeinflussen Sie gerne die Diskussion. Ich könnte jetzt viele Dinge noch erwähnen. Ich will einfach mal festhalten, wir haben offenbar eine wirkliche Veränderung, einen Shift von dieser Idee der offenen Internationalisierung, Open Internationalization, hin zu der Frage eines Netzwerkansatzes, eines Ansatzes, der auch als Responsible Internationalization beschrieben wurde. Das Problem ist, was genau ist das eigentlich? Und wir haben auch gemerkt, an der Stelle gibt es immer auch noch ein paar Unschärfen, was auch klar ist, weil jede Institution natürlich unterschiedlich die Frage beantwortet. Aber was wir schon festhalten können, es gibt eben diese Veränderung von einer weniger strategischen Herangehensweise an Internationalisierung hin zu einer sehr viel strategischeren, die mehr danach fragt: „Und was bringt das Ganze?“ Performance war ein wichtiger Punkt dabei. Jetzt kann man sagen, das ist eigentlich auch ein bisschen schade, weil ich meine, 'n bisschen naiv an internationale Beziehungen und Kooperationen ranzugehen, ist auch was Wichtiges vielleicht und nicht sofort zu fragen: „Was bringt uns das jetzt?“ Aber wir müssen auch einräumen, dass die Zeiten sich ja doch geändert haben und dass dieser stärkere strategische Ansatz heute wahrscheinlich für die meisten Institutionen ohne Alternative ist, wenn man diesen Begriff ohne Alternative überhaupt gebrauchen mag. Ich finde das auf jeden Fall eine ganz spannende Entwicklung. Ich habe mich die ganze Zeit gefragt, wenn wir eigentlich in diesem Krisenzeitalter uns bewegen. Peter Maaßen hat die vielen unterschiedlichen Krisen erwähnt. Wir spüren das in großen Teilen der Öffentlichkeit, dieser Eindruck einer Krise, einer sich verstärkenden Krise, einer Multikrise. Müsste das dann nicht eigentlich auch ein Zeitalter der Wissenschaft sein, ein Zeitalter der Erkenntnis sein, wenn wir doch wissen, Peter Maaßen hat diesen Punkt kurz berührt, dass die großen Probleme nur mit Hilfe der Wissenschaft und des internationalen Austauschs geklärt werden können? Müsste, ja, aber paradoxerweise erleben wir gerade ein wenig das Gegenteil. Wir erleben, dass die internationalen Herausforderungen und Probleme zunehmen, dass aber viele Gesellschaften die Antworten eher im nationalen Bereich sehen und dass das natürlich etwas ist, was auch noch mal die Rahmenbedingungen für internationalen Austausch, für internationale Kooperation sehr erschwert. Umso wichtiger für die Institutionen an der Stelle eine Strategie zu entwickeln und eine Strategie zu verfolgen, die, wir haben auch das gehört, jeweils passen muss zum Umfeld, zur Institution, zu den Menschen, die dort arbeiten. So viel vielleicht für den Augenblick. Morgen geht's weiter um 9:30 Uhr. Plattform kennen Sie jetzt schon, Link bleiben dieselben. Es geht natürlich dann auch wieder um Governance und Prozesse der Internationalisierung an Hochschulen, aber passend zu dem, was ich gerade gesagt habe, mit dem Schwerpunkt auf dem Risikomanagement der internationalen Kooperation. Wir wissen es alle, das Thema Risikomanagement spielt auch eine größere Rolle und ist auch Teil dieses Shifts, über den wir gesprochen haben. Wir bekommen eine Handreichung präsentiert und diskutieren über sichere und nachhaltige Kooperationsräume für internationale Studien und Promotionsprogramme. Ich bin schon sehr gespannt und sage, haben Sie einen schönen, vielleicht auch noch sonnigen, letzten sommerlichen Nachmittag, einen schönen Abend und ich hoffe, wir sehen uns morgen alle wieder um 9:30 Uhr bei HRK Advance. Machen Sie es gut. Bis dahin.